My brother has always been the kindest soul you could ever meet. Even after the accident that left him in a wheelchair,
I'm afraid we
he
need to
never
discuss some
once
urgent
let it
matters
bring
regarding
him
your
down.
property. There have been
He
several
always says,
violations noted,
you
and we
can't
need to address
control
them
what
immediately.
happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it. His positivity lights up every room he enters. But little did we know, moving into that new neighborhood would test his patience and kindness more than ever before. After we moved into the new community, everything felt peaceful at first. The houses were beautiful, the lawns were perfectly trimmed, and people smiled when they saw you. It looked like the perfect place to start a new chapter. My brother was so excited to finally have a small garden space of his own. He even planted roses right outside his window so he could see them every morning. For the first few weeks, life was calm, almost too calm, but then she appeared. Everyone in the neighborhood called her Karen. She wasn't just the president of the HOA, she was the HOA. She loved rules more than kindness, and she loved control more than community. From the very first day she saw my brother's wheelchair ramp, she frowned like it had personally insulted her. One morning, she knocked on our door with a clipboard in her hand and a fake smile on her face. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "That ramp in front of your house, it doesn't meet the community's visual standards." I remember standing there, speechless. My brother's wheelchair ramp was clean, safe, and necessary, yet she treated it like some sort of crime. I tried to explain, "Ma'am, my brother needs it. He's disabled," but she cut me off. "Rules are rules. You'll have to remove it or face a fine." That was the first time I saw my brother's face fall. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the ground. He hated confrontation, and he always believed people would eventually choose kindness. We tried to reason with her. We sent medical papers, photos, and even offered to paint the ramp the same color as the house. But she wouldn't listen. Every email she sent was filled with threats of violations, fees, and legal action. It wasn't about the ramp. It was about power. Then one day, something truly cruel happened. Karen was walking her dog past our house when my brother was outside, trying to fix a loose wheel on his chair. She stopped, crossed her arms, and said loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "You know, maybe this neighborhood isn't built for your kind of situation." My blood boiled. I wanted to shout, but my brother just smiled sadly and said, "It's okay. Some people see the wheelchair before they see the person." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how unfair it was, how someone could mock a man who had already been through so much. My brother had lost the use of his legs, not his dignity. But she made him feel small, and that was something I couldn't forgive easily. A week later, we got an official letter from the HOA. They were fining us $500 a week until the ramp was removed. Can you imagine? A fine for accessibility. My brother looked at me with tears in his eyes and said softly, "Maybe we should just move. It's not worth the fight." But I couldn't let him do that. I had watched him rebuild his life once already. He had survived months in the hospital, endless therapy sessions, and countless nights of pain. I wasn't about to let some bitter woman with a clipboard take his spirit away, so I started gathering evidence. I kept every letter, every rude comment, every fine notice. I even recorded one of her public rants at a neighborhood meeting, where she openly mocked the idea of special treatment. She laughed and said, "If we let one person break the rules, soon everyone will start claiming they have a reason." When I played that clip for my brother, he didn't say anything for a long time. Then, finally, he looked at me and said, "Maybe this time I shouldn't stay quiet." That was the turning point. We decided to take action, not just for us, but for anyone who had ever been pushed down by people like her. My brother filed a complaint with the county explaining everything: the discrimination, the mockery, the harassment. We didn't know what would happen, but we hoped for fairness. Days passed, then weeks. The HOA kept sending fines, and Karen kept walking past our house with that smug look on her face. But then, one afternoon, a black and white sheriff's car pulled into the neighborhood. The moment I saw it, my heart started racing. I didn't know if it was good news or bad. The sheriff stepped out, tall, calm, serious. He knocked on Karen's door. She answered, clearly surprised, and tried to put on her usual fake smile. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see her expression change from confidence to panic. Within minutes, the sheriff was handing her papers. She tried to argue, waving her hands around, but it didn't matter. The law was finally on our side. Later, we learned that the county had found her guilty of discrimination under housing laws. Her position as HOA president was revoked, and the entire HOA was ordered to pay damages for violating disability rights. When my brother found out, he didn't cheer or gloat. He just smiled quietly and said, "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers." That night we sat together on the porch watching the sunset. The ramp was still there, and this time it wasn't just a ramp. It was a symbol of strength, of resilience, of standing up for what's right even when it's hard. People in the neighborhood started acting differently after that. Some came over to apologize. Some even offered to help repaint the ramp. It was as if the entire place had woken up to what kindness really means. And Karen? She packed her bags and left within a week. Her perfect control over the neighborhood was gone. And for once, silence filled the street. A peaceful silence. The kind that feels like freedom. Sometimes, life puts you in front of people who try to break your spirit. But you have a choice. You can let them win, or you can rise above them. My brother taught me that strength isn't about walking. It's about standing tall inside, even when the world tries to push you down. If you've ever faced injustice, don't stay silent. Speak up, because sometimes the quietest voice can bring the loudest change. For the first time in months, the house felt light again. My brother's laughter filled the living room, the kind of laughter I hadn't heard in so long. It wasn't loud or forced. It was soft and real. He looked out the window at the ramp that had caused so much trouble and said quietly, "I never thought justice could feel this peaceful." The next few days, people from the neighborhood started stopping by. Some brought flowers, others brought small gifts, cookies, letters, even apology cards. One elderly couple came by and said, "We're so sorry we didn't speak up sooner. We were afraid of her." That sentence broke my heart. Fear had silenced so many people for so long. You see, Karen's HOA wasn't just strict, it was controlling. She had fined people for the color of their mailbox, for the size of their plants, even for hanging wind chimes. People had learned to stay quiet, to avoid her temper. But now that she was gone, the whole neighborhood felt like it could breathe again. My brother became somewhat of a local hero, not because he wanted fame, but because his courage had opened everyone's eyes. People who used to look away now waved at him when they saw him rolling down the sidewalk. Kids even came to pet his service dog, Max, and he would tell them gentle stories about kindness and standing up for others. One afternoon, the sheriff came back, this time, not for official business, but to say thank you. He shook my brother's hand and said, "What you did took courage. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for everyone in this community." I could see tears forming in my brother's eyes. He didn't see himself as brave. He had just done what felt right. But for the people around him, his actions meant something much bigger. That evening, we were invited to a neighborhood meeting. The new HOA board wanted to start fresh. I was hesitant at first. The memories of those stressful months were still raw. But my brother said, "We can't let fear keep us from building something better." So we went. When we walked into the community hall, people actually clapped. It was strange. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact were now smiling warmly. The new board members were kind and respectful. They began by apologizing for the past leadership and promised that the HOA would now stand for fairness, not control. One of the members, an older man named Mr. Collins, turned to my brother and said, "Your ramp stays. In fact, we'll make sure no one ever faces discrimination like that here again." That sentence hit deep. You could feel the shift, from fear to hope, from silence to voice. After that meeting, the neighborhood truly began to change. The lawns were still neat, but people no longer cared about perfection. They cared about people. Children played outside again, laughter filled the air, and neighbors helped one another with small things, fixing fences, mowing lawns, sharing meals. It felt like the soul of the community had returned, but something even more beautiful happened inside our own home. My brother began to find new purpose. Before the accident, he had always been active, volunteering, coaching, teaching. After it, he had lost some of that energy. But now he started speaking at local gatherings about disability awareness and kindness. One of his talks was at a nearby senior center. Most of the people there were older, like our audience today. He told them, getting older or facing challenges doesn't mean you stop making a difference. Sometimes your story can heal others more than you realize. Many people cried that day, not out of sadness, but out of inspiration. They saw in him the proof that no matter what life takes from you, it can never take your strength to stand up for what's right. At home, I noticed something subtle but powerful. The way he started smiling again for no reason. The way he hummed while watering his roses. The way he stopped apologizing for needing help. He had grown stronger in a quiet, unshakable way, and yet even with all the peace, some memories were hard to forget. Sometimes when we'd walk by the spot where Karen used to live, he'd stop for a second. His eyes would soften, and he'd say, "I hope she learned something from all this." He didn't say it with anger, only with sadness. Because deep down, he didn't want revenge. He wanted understanding. He wanted people to realize how much harm a few cruel words can do. Life slowly settled into a calm rhythm again. Every Sunday, we'd sit on the porch, drink coffee, and talk about everything. The past, the pain, and the peace that followed. My brother often said something that stuck with me. Life has two choices. You can be bitter or you can be better. It's strange how true that is. The accident could have broken him. Karen's cruelty could have destroyed his spirit. But instead, he chose to be better, and that choice changed everything. The local news eventually got hold of our story. They did a feature called "The Man Who Taught His Neighborhood Kindness." People across the county watched and sent letters of support. Some even shared how they had faced discrimination too, for age, disability, or background, and how our story gave them courage to fight back respectfully. The sheriff, who had once delivered justice, told us later that the story had inspired his department to start sensitivity training for officers. Imagine that. One man's quiet dignity leading to change that touched hundreds of lives. But perhaps the most moving moment came a few months later, when a young man knocked on our door. He was in a wheelchair, too. His voice trembled when he said, "Sir, I just wanted to meet you. Your story helped me stand up for myself at my college. I was afraid before, but not anymore." My brother invited him in, and they talked for hours. It was like watching two souls who understood each other completely. No words needed, just respect and empathy. That night, after the young man left, my brother looked at me with a soft smile. "You see," he said, "that's why we don't stay silent. One voice can echo farther than you think, and he was right. Kindness spreads. Even when it starts small, courage grows. Even when it feels like the world is against you." Sometimes all it takes is one act of standing up for what's right to remind others that compassion still matters. As days turned into months, our home became a place of warmth and belonging. Neighbors stopped by often, not out of pity, but out of genuine friendship. The ramp, once a symbol of conflict, became a gathering place. Kids sat on it, old friends leaned against it, and my brother called it the happiest piece of wood in town. We laughed, but I understood what he meant. That ramp had carried more than wheels. It had carried hope, struggle, and triumph. It had carried the weight of one man's fight for dignity. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been made to feel small, remember my brother's story. Remember that dignity is not given by others. It's something you hold inside, no matter what anyone says. Never let cruelty silence your kindness. And never let fear stop your truth. Because sometimes the smallest act of standing up can change not just your life, but an entire community. Time has a quiet way of healing what words cannot. Months passed, and the storm that had once filled our days with tension slowly faded into memory. Yet every time the morning sunlight touched the ramp outside our home, it reminded us of everything we had been through, the pain, the courage, and the grace that carried us through it all. My brother had changed in many ways. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. His days were filled with laughter, purpose, and gratitude. Every time I looked at him, I saw the strength of a man who refused to be defined by what he had lost. One morning, as we sat outside sipping tea, he said something I'll never forget. "You know," he began, "I used to think life was about walking the longest road. But now I know. It's about moving forward no matter how." I smiled, because that sentence held more wisdom than any book I had ever read. Life had tested him in ways most people never experience, yet he carried no bitterness. He carried peace. As the weeks went on, our neighborhood started organizing small community gatherings. People shared stories, music, and food. My brother was often invited to speak, not because of the wheelchair, but because of his spirit. His gentle voice carried power, the kind that makes you stop and think about your own life. One evening, during one of those gatherings, a woman stood up. She looked nervous at first. Then she said, "I was one of the people who never stood up to Karen. I was afraid she'd find me too. I'm sorry I stayed silent." My brother smiled at her kindly and replied, "Silence doesn't make you weak, but learning to speak up, that makes you strong. And it's never too late to choose strength." The room was quiet for a moment, then people started clapping. Some had tears in their eyes. That night I realized something profound, and forgiveness was the final victory. Not anger, not revenge, but forgiveness. After everything that happened, Karen eventually reached out. Not in person, but through a letter. It arrived one rainy afternoon. The handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. She wrote, "I know I can never take back the things I said. I was wrong. I thought rules made a community strong, but I forgot that kindness is the only real rule that matters. I hope someday you can forgive me." My brother read that letter silently. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in a small wooden box where he kept things that mattered: old photos, letters, and small memories of hope. He didn't say much, but I knew what he was thinking. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it frees you from carrying it forever. He simply said, "I forgive her." Those 3 words carried more weight than any punishment ever could. From that moment on, the story that once began with pain became a story of peace. The ramp that started as a symbol of struggle became a bridge between understanding and compassion. As time went by, my brother's health grew a little weaker, as happens with the years. But his heart never did. Every day he found joy in the smallest things: the smell of morning coffee, the sound of birds, the laughter of children passing by. He used to say, "Don't wait for big moments to feel alive. Life happens in the small moments you choose to notice." Those words became a guiding light not just for me, but for everyone who knew him. People in the neighborhood started calling him the Heart of Maple Street. They would drop by to talk, seek advice, or simply sit on the porch with him for a quiet moment of peace. One winter evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned golden, he looked at me and said, "If I've learned one thing in life, it's this. People will remember how you made them feel long after they forget your name. So make them feel kindness." That sentence still echoes in my heart. A few months later, the county honored him with a Community Courage Award. They said his bravery had changed not just the neighborhood, but how local HOAs handled accessibility and inclusion. When they called his name, the room stood in applause. He looked humbled, and with that familiar quiet smile said, "I didn't do it alone. I did it with a community that found its heart again." After that day, I realized the true meaning of strength. It isn't found in power or rules or pride. It's found in the simple acts of choosing compassion when the world gives you reasons not to. Even now, whenever I walk past that old ramp, I stop for a moment. I trace my hand over the wooden rail, worn smooth by time and touch, and I remember everything, the pain, the struggle, the victory, and the peace that followed. The ramp still stands, strong as ever, even after years of rain and sun. And every time I see it, I smile because it tells a story. Our story. A story about how one man in a wheelchair reminded an entire community that humanity is stronger than hatred. A story about how one act of courage can turn into a wave of change. And most importantly, a story about how kindness, even when mocked, even when challenged, always finds a way to win. So, to everyone listening or reading this, especially those of you who've lived long enough to know that life isn't always fair, remember this: you're never too old, too tired, or too broken to make a difference. Your kindness still matters. Your voice still matters. Your courage still matters. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for standing up for what's right. And don't let the bitterness of others steal the peace you've earned. Life will always have its Karens, people who use rules or power to hurt others. But it will also have people like my brother. People who choose grace over anger, hope over fear, and love over pride. Be one of those people. Because at the end of the day, the strongest heart isn't the one that never breaks. It's the one that keeps beating with kindness, no matter what. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that compassion still exists. Because the more we spread stories of kindness, the less room there is for cruelty in this world. And remember, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers.